Hey everyone, how are you guys doing today? I am Benny Lewis from Flute in 3 months. You should be hopefully hearing me okay. And I wanted to go through your questions today. So let me make myself a little bigger on the screen. There we go. So I can see your questions. Hey everyone, how are you guys doing today? To decide, and I'm going to be flicking through them. I am make sure actually from Flute in 3 months. You questions should be through. Hopefully hearing me okay. Here we are. And I wanted anyone to on go Facebook your questions today. I'll start seeing your questions now. So let's see what we got. Bigger on the screen. There we go. It's so Anorax Forever is back. You've been here at other to decide other live Q&As. What's where's everybody from? I'll give you a little hello shout out when I see your names coming up. Matías says hola Benny, ¿cómo estás? Estoy muy bien. Anyone on Facebook? Un poquito cansado. I'll start seeing your questions then. But otherwise be so. Let's see what we got English for you there. So let me see. So Anorax Forever is back. First question we got was from Henrique Reis, which is my bad. Where's everybody from? I'll give you a little hello shout out. First name and a German surname. See your names coming up. Oh, echo. Matías says hola Benny, ¿cómo estás? Estoy muy bien. Anyone on Facebook? Un poquito cansado. I'll start seeing your questions then. But otherwise be so. Let's see what we got English for you there. So let me see. So Anorax Forever is back. First question we got was from Henrique Reis, which is my bad. Where's everybody from? I'll give you a little hello shout out. First name and a German surname. See your names coming up. Oh, echo. Matías says hola Benny, ¿cómo estás? Estoy muy bien. Anyone on Facebook? Un poquito cansado. I'll start seeing your questions then. But otherwise be so. Let's see what we got English for you there. So let me see. So Anorax Forever is back. First question we got was from Henrique Reis, which is my bad. Where's everybody from? I'll give you a little hello shout out. First name and a German surname. See your names coming up. Oh, echo. Matías says hola Benny, ¿cómo estás? Estoy muy bien. Anyone on Facebook? Un poquito cansado. I'll start seeing your questions then. But otherwise be so. Let's see what we got English for you there. So let me see. So Anorax Forever is back. First question we got was from Henrique Reis, which is my bad. Where's everybody from? I'll give you a little hello shout out. First name and a German surname. See your names coming up. Oh, echo. Matías says hola Benny, ¿cómo estás? Estoy muy bien. Anyone on Facebook? Un poquito cansado. I'll start seeing your questions then. But otherwise be so. Let's see what we got English for you there. So let me see. So Anorax Forever is back. First question we got was from Henrique Reis, which is my bad. Where's everybody from? I'll give you a little hello shout out. First name and a German surname. See your names coming up. Oh, echo. Matías says hola Benny, ¿cómo estás? Estoy muy bien. Anyone on Facebook? Un poquito cansado. I'll start seeing your questions then. But otherwise be so. Let's see what we got English for you there. So let me see. So Anorax Forever is back. First question we got was from Henrique Reis, which is my bad. Where's everybody from? I'll give you a little hello shout out. First name and a German surname. See your names coming up. Oh, echo. Matías says hola Benny, ¿cómo estás? Estoy muy bien. Anyone on Facebook? Un poquito cansado. I'll start. Can you hear me now? Oh. Tell me the words you can hear without an echo. Blue, 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 blue. Okay. So, sorry about that, everyone. You should be hearing me now, and sorry that the first 10 minutes were dead audio. I appreciate you all hanging out and waiting till I could get this fixed. I have had lots of issues with this software, and audio's gone again. I usually have a moderator who helps me set this up, and there it is. Great. Okay. So, now that it's working, next time I will try to do this ahead of time, guys, and then you should be able to hear me start it, jump right into it. Thank you very much, everyone who has hung around this long to wait until I got this sound working. It's always a technical problem. Doing a live video is extremely complicated. Anyway, I'm going to go through your questions. I'm going to reward everyone who waited with I'm going to reward your patience by answering whatever I can. So, back to the start. Hopefully these people who were here earlier are still there. We had a question from Enrique who said, I have problems with grammatical rules and German, for instance, the dative. Any tip? If you are... Oh, Enrique is still here. Good. Okay. So when you're learning German, especially German, but I found with a lot of languages that you can get very bogged down with the grammatical terms, and with the dative, for instance. When I took, you guys probably know already, I took German in school, and I tried to understand it, and I found it too hard. And to me, dative represented a column in a table of grammatical rules. And what changed for me when I learned German in my 20s for a trip to Germany was I tried to understand it conceptually. So if you look up a definition of some kind of a grammatical term in a language you're learning, then you'll find that the explanation doesn't really, I mean, it can explain this is when you have an indirect object, and that's maybe that'll help you, but that doesn't really feel intuitive to me. So what does help me is seeing if I can find a simpler explanation, firstly, and secondly, even better, is just learning it in context and learning phrases. So with the example you gave, the dative, which is this like indirect way of using a grammar rule, what I found worked for me was to see many example phrases with it and see how those phrases kind of worked with what I know from English, and then get used to it that way. And then when I have my teachers, they would correct me, and I would try to remember not the logic of it, because keep this in mind, everyone, that when you're learning a language, or when you're speaking your mother tongue, you don't tend to stop and go through all the rules in your head and say, I conjugate this verb and I'll change that because it's masculine and that because it's feminine. You don't do that. It comes out naturally without thinking about it. And that's the stage you want to be at with your target language. So I would just try to speak it out, and if a native speaker happens to be around, I'll get them to correct me. And that level of correction fed back into speaking helps me internalize a grammar rule. Because if you're like me, you can't really process grammar in that more logical explanation kind of way. Okay, so I hope that answers your question, Enrique. So next, flicking through, other than the many people telling me there's an echo, there's no sound, now you're gone. Let's see what the next question I got here was. So, Balaji Narayan says over on YouTube, how to learn a language using the 80-20 rule. Can you give me an example full version? Okay, so 80-20 rule, for you guys who don't know this is something called the Pareto principle. And it is a very efficient way to do many things, many projects you might have in life. And I think it's especially important with language learning, because a mistake that a lot of people make is they decide that to be able to speak a language, they need to know 100% of that language, which is insane, because I'm a native English speaker and I do not know 100% of English. There's always things I don't know, like words for specializations, for instance. But as a beginner of a language, there's still a lot of words that I don't know, and I have to work around that and essentially use 20% to achieve 80%, if that makes any sense. So you do 20% of the work to get 80% of the communication. Because when you speak a language, there's a lot of advanced vocabulary that you do not use very often. There's a lot of advanced terms of grammar and ways of forming sentences that you might need once in a while. But if you learn that at the beginning, that's very inefficient. So you should learn the 20% of the language that's going to work 80% of the time. So to give you an example, let's say I was learning Spanish, and one mistake I made in Spanish was I found the conjugations to be very complicated. So I figured, okay, I'll get out a big book and I'll study those conjugations. And it started to get overwhelming. And what I found was, one thing is embrace mistakes, and it's okay if you don't say it right, that's fine. But another solution that worked for me where I was still able to speak correctly was if I used something called modal verbs. So instead of learning the conjugation of all of these complicated words, like there's all these words that would change to a we sound if you have an o. Instead of learning all of that, I would learn some irregular versions for specific verbs that let me put another verb after them. So to show you what I mean, let's say I wanted to say that I run every day. And I know that the verb to run is correr, but I don't know if it's an irregular verb. Well, instead of saying I run every day, I could change it a little bit and say I can run every day. It doesn't have the same essential meaning to it, but it doesn't have the exact same sense to it, but it has that same general thing, and you're implying the same things. So if you know how to say I can, then you just take that dictionary form, put it right after it. So by learning dictionary forms like I can, I want to, by learning those words that are followed by the dictionary form. So I want to, quiero. I can follow that by any word in the dictionary that I don't need to learn its conjugation. And it means that when I'm speaking, and I know what the word is, but I don't know how to say it in this situation for for the I form of the verb or whatever, I will just add another verb in front of it. And that sense is that 20% of the work is knowing the selection of words you can use that lets you kind of skip that conjugation thing temporarily. And that's one example of like cheating a little bit and doing 20% of the work, but you're still getting your communication across. So I hope that makes sense as an example of implementing the Pareto principle. All right. Next, we have many comments about how the echoes are. And Anorex Forever says, can you use, because she can't hear me. She or he, sorry. I don't know what gender names like that are. Okay. There's no sound. And okay. Balaji has another question. How can you reach C1 level in a language? Okay, so C1 level, that is lower advanced, and essentially, in a nutshell, to reach the B levels, you get a lot of spoken practice, you get like into the language, and then when I get to the B levels, what I tend to do is a lot of, to be honest, traditional language learning. So I would be very critical of traditional means of learning languages when you're starting off, because I think learning grammar rules and doing exercises, that's not very useful for an absolute beginner. But when I'm later on in the language, I've gotten a lot of practice, but I've gotten practice through things like the Pareto principle, embracing making mistakes. So it's a very unpolished version of the language. And that's why I buckle down and I will get a big fat grammar book that probably has no pictures in it, and I will go through it. I will go through the exercises. I will get a teacher who is going to test me on what I know, and I'm going to add that kind of structure that I think already exists in a lot of language courses, regardless of which one you choose. If you want a suggestion, I partner with Teach Yourself for my own courses, and one advantage is that they go on to have the Teach Yourself Complete series, some of which do work up to a C1 level. So that kind of structure, getting lessons and doing something harder. So C1 implies you have some kind of a professional use of the language. So in my case, I would read electronic engineering journals, because that's what my background is. I try to get that professional side. Or rather than Skyping someone and saying, so what did you do over the weekend? And that kind of really basic kind of conversation, I would have like a philosophical debate. I still to this day remember a lesson I had with my French teacher, where she got me. It was a very big issue in France at the time, where gay marriage was getting legalized, and she wanted to have like a debate with me. And she said, what's your opinion? And I said, I'm for gay rights. I think they should be able to marry. And she said, okay, defend that. And I had to make an argument for it. And that showed me what I was unable to express. And she helped me to see my weaknesses and to fix them. So that kind of conversation is very different to when you bump into someone and say, hey, how are you doing? How are you watching the game tomorrow? It is like having those deeper, harder conversations. And there are many ways you can push yourself with that. So that's what I would suggest for getting to C1 level. And then the final tip that I think I mentioned last time is I would see if there are C1 exams in your target language run by an institution, like if it's French, the Alliance Française, if it's Spanish, Instituto Cervantes, and so on. And I would sign up and do some mock exams and work towards doing that. That's one other way I would. Okay, Georgia says, are mnemonics really helpful? It depends. I personally don't like have a photographic memory, if such a thing even exists, that I would hear a word and then remember it forever. So I need some way to help me remember that word, and a mnemonic gives me a quirky little story that I will actively try to remember it. Now, this is not useful for when you're speaking a language consistently to keep using all these mnemonics. The only point for me is to kind of cement it into my brain so that those first 2 or 3 times I do have to think of the mnemonic to remember it. But then after that, I just have the word come naturally. So a mnemonic is kind of like a stepping stone. It's not something you use throughout your language learning career, but it is helpful to get those words into your mind permanently. Okay. So I'm learning the sign exact English now. Who do I practice with? I don't know what you mean by that, Anorex Forever. Sign exact English now. Is that like a product? Is that sign language? You're going to have to explain that for me to be able to understand and help you out. Sorry about that. And thanks everyone for confirming you can hear me. Appreciate that. Jonathan and Pam and Geografia y Más. Arash, Matthias, the Carly Monster. Who else have we got? We got Lorna, Ice Queen, Yassine. So, and I'm sure I've missed a few people. Thank you everyone who have been confirming my sound situation. Alright, so next. Kyle likes the background with the talking and the screencast. Glad you guys like this. I actually have a few things to make this more interesting because black isn't that exciting, and I keep having the technical problems to set it up. So one of these times you're going to see some extra fun things happening during these live hangouts, just as soon as I can get them to work in the first place. Okay, so how do you memorize Chinese characters and their tones? That is two completely separate, and to be honest, I mean, they're related in that some characters show you what their tone is as an aspect of it, but they're very, very different issues. So with Chinese, as a rule, I always tell people you got to learn your language in a similar way that you had learned your mother tongue and how useful it came to you. So I don't actually recommend you start learning Chinese. I would say start learning Mandarin, the spoken version of the language. Learn it using pinyin. Get Skype sessions, use listening exercises, and learn the language that way. And then as you're learning the spoken language, to memorize tones, there's several ways you could do that. One, when I was learning, I tried out the Michel Thomas method, and he had a kind of, I think he used colors in his mnemonic to tie things in together. Generally, what I would do, because I would use my mnemonics visually, is I would have a visualization of what the tone is. So, as an example, something I said a lot when I was learning Mandarin was that my target or my goal was to speak the language in a few months. And that word is mu biao. And so I had to come up with a mnemonic to remember that meant target, and it meant, and remember the tones as well. So the first one is a falling tone, so mu. And what I imagined was a little story. So I imagine, okay, I'm out in the field, walking around, minding my own business, when suddenly, out of the sky, falls a cow. And it's like, moo! And he falls on the ground. And fortunately, the cow survived. And she's standing up in a daze. And this is when I'm like, oh, it's my chance for some target practice. And I have a bow and arrow made entirely out of bees. So that is I pull it back, I shoot it, and it goes straight. And this is because it's that tone in Chinese that stays still because it's mu biao. It's like I'm not saying it correctly now because I'm switching between English and Mandarin. Apologies for that. But that biao is like I think it's the third tone. I forget the numbers. Whichever one is the non-changing tone, um, and it's B ow because I shoot an arrow made of bees. It goes towards the cow in a straight line, hits it up the bum, and the cow kind of forgets itself. Instead of saying moo, it says ow. So we have falling tone, moo, and level tone, biao, and that is how you say. Um, that's how you say target in Mandarin, and that's how I remembered the tones by adding into my mnemonic the movements, the falling, the straight. You might imagine jumping and bouncing and all these other things. So I hope that helps with that. And then the characters, that's a more complicated thing. I only learned a couple of hundred characters myself because reading is something I would do in the intermediate stages. I just finally got into those. So I wouldn't give the best advice for that. One thing I would do, though, if I were you, is see if you can get the Scrivener app, because that kind of makes it a little bit fun as you're testing it. Another is the Remember the Hanse. It's a book that explains its own mnemonic system. I personally didn't love that mnemonic system, but it's something a lot of people swear by. So that's a very separate thing, learning the Chinese characters. But I hope my little story helps with the idea of remembering the tones. So, moving on. Tyler, what language have you always wanted to learn but haven't yet? No language at all. Because if I've wanted to learn a language, then I would have endeavored to make it happen and gone and learned it. So generally what happens for me is I might be traveling and I might bump into somebody who speaks the language speaks that language. Like for instance, with Mandarin, I people had asked me why haven't you started learning Mandarin yet, and I hadn't been inspired to learn it, but I was in Chicago at the time learning Klingon for the Star Trek convention, and at a couchsurfing meeting I met some people from Taiwan, and I was like, oh, I can't go live in China for several months because they'll block YouTube and Facebook, and I need to use that for my blogging and stuff. And they say, well, actually, in Taiwan, we don't do that. In Taiwan, we have one of the freest presses in the world, and it's a different country. And they explained the situation with Taiwan to me, and it really piqued my interest, and that got me inspired to learn Mandarin. I did still go to China, but that was for traveling, whereas Taiwan was more living there, learning the language. So there's no language that I've always wanted to learn. I just get inspired to learn languages and then I dive into them. I might still learn languages. There's some travels I got coming up, which I'll keep a secret for now, and I will likely end up learning those languages. But to be absolutely honest, I haven't always wanted to. It's more the idea of speaking with certain culture or visiting that country inspires me to. All right, let's see what else we got. Matías says, ¿cuál sería tu mejor consejo para aprender japonés? Diría lo mismo que acabo de decir allí en mandarín, que hay que hablar primero y escribir después, porque escribir el kanji debe costar mucho tiempo, que si quieres de verdad hablar el idioma, escribir tiene que venir después. Entonces, también el kana sería muy útil para escribir vocabulario. Yo utilicé katakana, hiragana en Anki para recordar las palabras y nunca kanji, porque katakana y hiragana puedes aprender muy rápido, como en 2 o 3 días. Yo lo aprendí por Memrise. Hay historias y tal para ayudarte, pero si Eso es lo que yo aconsejaría para aprender a japonés. Hope that answers your question. All right. So, any great Spanish schools? I get this question a few times. I don't know specific Spanish schools. I'm more about independent learning, so maybe somebody else can suggest that. Pam says, "What's your opinion on memory palaces or memory mapping for language learning?" Um, a memory palace is more of a thing for remembering large quantities of information that are connected in some way. So, like, if you wanted to learn, I don't know, if you wanted to learn like the numbers of a language, or if you wanted to learn the months of the year, maybe a memory palace would help you with that if the words are that different to English. But to be honest, I would tend to just learn one word at a time, because a memory palace would imply that I'm learning something and saying it in a sequence. Memory palaces are more useful for like I did actually use memory palaces as an electronic engineer. I had to remember very complicated equations which had many parts of them, and like square roots, integrals divided by this and to the power of that, and like many letters of the Greek alphabet. So that's like remembering a lot of different things in a very specific order. And for that, I did use memory palaces to help me. But for language learning, I would just generally use a story, a visualization through a mnemonic for one word at a time. And, maybe if you see groups of words that are connected in some way that you're likely to use in succession, then sure, memory palace could help. But I don't think it's that necessary otherwise. Okay. So, Arash then says, "I've been learning Estonian for 18 months and I don't feel like I'm getting anywhere. It sounds that I can never reach the native level. What would you suggest for languages with a lot of cases?" So, a few things here. You feel like you're not getting anywhere. And what makes you feel like that? Is it because you're studying books and you then go on to maybe like watch a TV show and you don't understand it? Because that happens to me as well. In many cases, I would have put a lot of work into a language, even months, and sometimes even have been learning a language for years, and then go to a situation, a particular kind of situation, that completely intimidates me and throws me off. My first language that I learned after English was Spanish. And for the longest time, any situation I would go to with native Spanish speakers, watching TV, socializing even, where they would be speaking between one another, I found it next to impossible. And I also felt like I was getting nowhere. What changed was I changed the kind of things I was exposing myself to. I started learning with other learners. I went to Erasmus parties to meet like French people, German people who were learning Spanish, and they would speak slowly for me. I had this ridiculous idea of picking up El Señor de los Anillos, the Lord of the Rings, and reading that in Spanish, and I did not feel like I was getting anywhere. It took me like 2 weeks to get to page 2. So definitely can't recommend that. So it's actually about the kind of things you're doing with your time. So maybe you have a conversation partner and you feel like you're not progressing with them. So try something else. Try to read comic books. Maybe you can understand TV, but you've been trying to watch the news. Maybe try to find a soap opera. I'm sure you can find access to these things somehow. So that's the first thing about you feeling like you're not getting anywhere. Next, you say you can never reach native level. So who cares? It's not a big deal if you can't reach native level. Like I definitely have not reached native level in any language that I speak other than English. I've reached C levels, so I can like function professionally in the language, but I definitely still have an accent. I've been in cases where I can make people think that maybe I'm a native speaker, but only under very controlled conditions, where it's they all like they don't know in advance that I am a foreigner, so they don't have that kind of bias, and so I can like maybe mimic the musicality of how they speak and use particular phrases, so they might mistake me for a native speaker. But to be at a stage where you have actually reached native level, that is extremely difficult. And I actually remember even Richard Simcott made a video once where he said he doesn't think he's ever met anyone who would have learned a language as an adult and reached native level. That is just really, really difficult. I'm sure it's possible, but why? Why would you want to? Like, in my case, I'm Irish. I want people to know I'm Irish. I have my lovely Irish accent that I use when I speak, and I grew up in another culture and another place, so it's going to come across anyway. I'm going to use some weird expression. I'm going to say, oh, when I was young and I used to watch Bosco on TV, and everyone would look around and say, Bosco? What's that? I've never heard of Bosco. And that's because it's something we watched in Ireland. So, you will always reveal yourself to not be a native of the language culturally, even if you would be able to do that linguistically. So don't have that as your goal. Your goal should not be to reach native level. You can strive to be at a mastery level where you can do essentially everything that you can do in your native language in the language that you're learning, in this case Estonian. But don't have a goal to reach native level. It's not useful. I mean, unless you want to be a spy, if you are planning to infiltrate the Estonian government and like James Bond your way into things, then that's different. But otherwise, there is no genuinely good reason other than it sounds cool that you would want to be mistaken for a native speaker all the time. So just aim high and don't worry about it. And for languages with a lot of cases, that was actually the very first question I took about German and how I handled that. But if it has lots of cases, I didn't tend to think of the cases from a grammatical perspective. I just learn them in phrases. So if it's in this kind of phrase, if there's that kind of preposition, then it has this kind of ending, and don't overthink it too much. Try to see which rules, with cases especially, these Slavic languages. In my case, I learned Czech, a little bit of Czech. And I found that, there's a standard ending that they might tend to have. And I would just use that all the time. There are like many, many exceptions, but I would just use whatever the standard ending for that case tends to be. People understand me. And then with time, I will learn naturally how to change that. So, Arash, I hope that answers your question. All right. I'm going to be on for another 10 minutes. I want to get through as many questions as I can before then. Any advice on learning multiple languages at once? Don't do it. I can't advise learning multiple languages. I would say one at a time. If you want to learn multiple languages, learn one language for several months and then learn the other language for several months, because that focus is going to get you ahead. And ideally, try to focus on one language until you get to advanced intermediate stage at least. This is like where fluency begins, because otherwise you are more likely to make them up. All right. Any best free website or app for learning languages? It depends. I'm not going to get into questions that are too general this time. I will be doing more of these general language learning question hangouts and live videos for another few weeks at least. So if I don't get to your questions today, I will try to do that later. But I do need some specifics, like if you say best website for learning languages. Learning what language? Do you want to pass an exam? Do you want to be able to speak it? Do you want to be able to understand it? There's too many criteria there, so I won't be able to help you with that until I have more information. So Caroline says, what do you think about Slavic languages? I like them. I don't know if you're expecting like a Rotten Tomatoes review of Slavic languages. Like, they roll off the tongue in a certain way that agrees with me, but I'm not a big fan of the vocative. I got. I'm not the kind of person who would really have thoughts on a language, because a language for me is a means to an end. It is a thing that helps me speak with a certain culture. So I neither like nor dislike languages. Like with French, people say, "Oh, French sounds so beautiful." To me, it is just the way that you speak to French people, French-speaking Canadians, Belgians, and so on. It is not a language to like or dislike. And the same goes for every other language. So, with Slavic languages, which is like a group of them, I think that they are extremely useful languages to speak with Slavic-speaking people. And that's that's the answer I can give you for that. What do you think about Euskara? I think that Euskara has a K in it, and I'm very passionate about thinking about that. You know, and I hope you don't disagree with me that Euskara has a K in it, because that's what I think about it. Okay, Kyle says, how do you evaluate if the way you're studying is effective? When to correct course or just stay on track? Um, yeah, it's a very good question. What I find is, are you getting stuck at a plateau? Because if you're plateauing, if you feel like you're not progressing, then that's where I would correct course. I would not say whether it's like effectiveness depends, because what you did got you to the point that you're currently at. So in a way, that approach was effective. It just might not be effective for getting you further, and that's why I try to have more of a dynamic learning approach. So that's where I try to see, am I progressing, and if not, do something completely different. Maybe in my case, if I'm doing a speak from day one approach, then it might be time for me to accept, okay, more spoken practice isn't going to solve this problem. I gotta go put my head in the books and study some exercises and learn some rules and have a spoken session on Skype that's about something difficult that I'm not going to enjoy as much. And I have to accept that, and I have to change things along those lines. And generally, I would correct course to make what I'm using my time on to focus on what my weaknesses are. So if I speak with too many grammar mistakes, study a grammar book or get corrections from native speakers or find native speakers who are likely to correct me. If I feel like my accent is too strong, then focus on that. I would have like singing lessons in one of my projects where someone would train me to be able to pronounce things. So see what your weakness is and focus on that. Okay, do you recommend using GCSE A-level course books as a resource, Harriet? No, I would not. In Ireland, we have something very similar to the GCSE and A-level. It's called the Junior Cert and Leaving Cert. And those courses are designed to help you pass the exams associated with them. An A-level course will be made to help you pass an A-level exam. And I don't know exactly how it's split, but in Ireland we have this like percentage focus for how much of the exam depends on written skills, how much depends on listening skills, and so on. And like if you have to sit these exams, then the course books, you got to use them because they are designed to be the best way to give you the best distribution of information to get there. But generally, I find I've like talked with people about this, that if you separate to the exam you have to take, if you get into spoken practice in the language, that gives you this deeper understanding of it that then makes everything else become a little bit easier. But those courses, to use them outside of those exams, I would not recommend you do that. Okay, Drew, what's your routine for taking a C1 exam? It's kind of complicated. You can ask me that question the next time, and maybe I'll have the time to answer it. I want to get through as many as I can in the last 5 minutes. Okay, Georgia wants to know how Speak from Day One works practically. Yeah, that's a good question. Have I made a video about this? I know I'm supposed to make a YouTube video about this, so I will be making one. If I don't, the next time you see me, then feel free to ask me. Imane says, very good tip. Sometimes you use boya. Yeah, that's an excellent one instead of the future conjugation. That's the most obvious one. That's I should have thought of that one. The ones I gave were not as practical, so definitely that is a good example. Okay, and Jonathan gives a good example for doing that in French. Yep. And let's see. Jack says, I love studying Spanish. It's difficult to see what to prioritize. I would say it's something similar to what I said about prioritizing what's going to help you most. Osni says, qual a tua definição de fluência? Para mim, fluência quer dizer que eu posso fazer tudo na língua que estou aprendendo como se fosse eu em situações sociais. So, if anyone doesn't understand the Portuguese what's my definition of fluency? Means when I can function exactly like me, like I normally would, in social situations. So, as pessoas podem falar rápido se querem. E eu não preciso ter uma conversação com palavras mais simples. Eles podem falar normal, com numa velocidade. People can speak the right speed. Normally, they don't have to adjust their words, and I can still follow along. So that's all the things I can do. But it's also important that fluency recognize things you can't do. Eu não posso ter uma conversação sobre filosofia e coisas assim muito complicadas. E eu não posso trabalhar como um profissional na língua. So I can't necessarily work professionally in the language, depending on the job. You know, if you do something physical with your hands, then you could still be a fluent speaker and you can work at that job. But if you want to be a university professor, or if you want to talk about technical engineering things, that's not, that for me is mastery. And the thing is, most people don't actually need that. Most people, when they go to another country, they may only need the language socially, and that's the language flows, and that's why we would use the word fluent. Okay, let's see. Stephanie, I'll have to answer your question the next time, I think. Give us an excellent method to learn French in uppercase letters. Speak from day one, read my book. I mean, oh my god. You might as well ask me the question, Benny, what is good in general in life? You know, summarize it in 10 words. Okay, Lorna trying to roll the R. Very quick tip for you: if you remember, if you imagine the letters L and D in English, the R, the single tapped R, firstly, is between those. So try to say la da, and say it very quickly: la da, and then try to say the Spanish single R between that, and it's something very similar. It's ra, la, da, ra. And that is something we kind of say in English, like the American English, the word butter, butter, they would say it like butter, and that butter, that sound is a little closer to the Spanish single R. And when you got that down, it's very hard to go directly to the r sound, but your tongue has kind of adjusted to the single R, and I kind of relax it as I like try to blow air out my mouth. There's lots of YouTube videos you can look up that might explain it in a thorough way by a native speaker, and you might have diagrams and so on. So yeah, I hope that a very quick tip helps. Would you learn another foreign language? Yes, I would, Georgia. You've seen on Facebook, how can I improve listening and writing in a more interactive way? Yeah, sorry guys, I'm going to have to flick through these till I see an easy question to wrap up. So no need to ask any more questions for now. I'm just going to wrap up the last couple of minutes, and I'm going to try, and I'm very sorry if I missed your questions here. Feel free to write them in the comments when the video goes live later. Or I'm not sure if I'll leave it live because of all the time wasting the first 10 minutes. But you can ask there. But otherwise, just try to catch me another one of these. I will do a spontaneous general language learning live video so I can answer your questions there. So I don't know when that'll be. I'll surprise you. So make sure you click the bell icon to get notifications. Obviously, you're subscribed to this. I mean, that goes without saying that you're subscribed to me. But click the bell and you'll get a notification. I'll do another Q&A and I'll hopefully get to as many of these as I can. Sarka says I've inspired her with reading Harry Potter in Irish. Wow, I'm very glad to see that. That makes me happy, Sarka. Tips on French would be cool. French is a language. And what other tips can I give you? That if you learn it, you can use it in a country called France. That's right. And that tip is trademark Benny Lewis. Don't let that get out there without associating with me. In your view, what's the best way of beginning to learn enough words to get up to scratch? Best way is focus on cognates. That's words that are the same in your mother tongue. That'll give you a little kind of heads up. And then words you're most likely to use, so words about yourself if you're introducing yourself to people. How many languages do you speak currently? Depends on how you define speak. This person says, hey. I hope that addressed that question appropriately. I hope so. Okay. Background is nice, Benny. Thank you. Do you like what I've done with the place? I call it noir. It's like my own design. I'm becoming a fashion expert in an interior design, and this is like, this is what the inside of my mind is like, you know. Okay. Sorry, I'm skipping through a lot of these. I know a lot of questions, interesting questions there. Trying to get to the end. Okay, and smiley faces. Long question that I can't really go through right now. And okay, we're getting to the end here. I'm sorry, everyone, I've not gotten to your question. Next time, I promise I will try really, really hard to start on time and to have it actually working and the sound and so on. And then I will be able to get through your questions. But as you can see, I still kept this going for a whole hour. I started late, so I kept it going to late. And yeah, okay, so I got to the end here. Please post this live video so you can reference your answers again. Okay. I don't like posting live videos when first 10 minutes are technical problems of me with the sound. But because you asked nicely, I will absolutely post this video. And I guess I'll put a little comment saying, skip to this point when the microphone finally works. Okay, so I think I've caught up on as much as I can. I'm sorry that the last whatever half hour of questions you might have put didn't I wouldn't have gotten through them. So yeah, thanks everyone for popping in. I really appreciate it, and I will do another one of these soon. So make sure you, if you have if you've got your smartphone with any like Facebook, YouTube, any of those things, then sign up for notifications, and I will do another at least one of these over the next week, and then I'll do some other live things that aren't general Q&As, like I might live stream a game or something like that. And then if you get a little ping notification, you will be able to join me and you might be able to finally get that question answered. So thanks for joining me, everyone. I appreciate your patience, and I promise these are going to get more interesting. I've got really fun ideas. Just need to get it to work. Need to get it to work from the start, and then I'm gonna get some fun extra things that'll make this more interesting for you guys. So thank you, Kyle, for stopping in. Hasta la próxima vez, Robert. And then adios, Matias. And yeah, thanks everyone for stopping in. Really appreciate it. And we can talk some more next time. So, I will be in touch. Take it easy and